everyone, and welcome to this special 4th of July edition of our live webinar series, proudly presented by immigrationquestion.com, your trusted destination for real time immigration guidance, legal insights, and conversations with licensed immigration attorneys who know the system inside and out. My name is Anusya Mukherjee, and I'll be your host for today's session Asylum, Defensive Asylum for Immigration Courts. For many immigrants, facing deportation is one of the most overwhelming experiences imaginable. But there's hope. Defensive asylum is a powerful legal option that can stop removal proceedings and offer a path to stay in the US legally and safely. But here's the thing, it only works if you know your rights, understand how the court process works, and are prepared to advocate for yourself or support someone else through it. That's why today's session is so important, and why we're honored to be joined by attorney Nathan Bogart, an experienced immigration attorney and the lead of the immigration litigation team of Bogart, Small and Dewey. Attorney Bogart represents clients across the country in removal proceedings, bond hearings, and complex asylum litigation. He's won high-stake appeals and knows what it takes to build a strong case, even when the odds are stacked against you. Welcome to the show, Attorney Bogart. We're glad to have you on board.
No, thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you. Before we get started, just a quick reminder, Immigration Question is a two-in-one platform that connects users to licensed immigration attorneys. We are not a law firm, nor are we affiliated with AILA or USCIS. All legal services are provided independently by attorneys registered to our network. So let's jump right into the questions. Attorney Bogart, let's start with the basics. What is defensive asylum, and how does it differ from affirmative asylum?
That's a great question. Even like you said, if it's a basic question. So there really are two types of asylum. The legal analysis between the two is exactly the same, but it really comes down to where your case is being processed, or better said, which agency is processing your case. So defensive asylum applications are asylum applications that are made with the immigration court with the intent to avoid removal or deportation from the United States. Whereas affirmative asylum applications are made with the asylum office managed by the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and they're made proactively by the applicant.
Okay, thank you for that. Many of our viewers may not fully understand how someone ends up in immigration court seeking asylum. So, what are the most common situations that lead to a person needing to apply for asylum defensively?
Well, people can end up in removal proceedings for all sorts of reasons. I would say that the vast majority of people who we represent in our office end up in removal proceedings because they have entered the United States with the intent of seeking asylum, and they're encountered at a port of entry or at the border and are detained by U.S. Customs and Border Enforcement. And so what happens at that point is they're issued a notice to appear and assigned a court date, and then they're able to move forward with their cases from there. Now, sometimes people make it through without having had contact with CBP at the border or at another port of entry. And so they end up in removal proceedings because they're arrested by the police in the town that they're living and passed over to ICE custody, or because they've committed some sort of crime or otherwise encountered immigration and customs enforcement after arriving in the United States.
Thank you for that. Defensive asylum cases are decided in immigration court, not through USCIS. Can you walk us through what that court proceeding typically looks like for someone seeking asylum defensively, and what should they expect on each stage?
Yeah, so it kind of depends on how you end up. Like we were just reviewing, there's several ways to end up in court. One way that I neglected to mention is if you're someone who applied for asylum affirmatively and the asylum office decides not to approve your asylum application, that application might be referred to the immigration court, where the immigration judge will get the final say as to whether your case will be approved or not. Now, as far as the proceedings are concerned, they're fairly straightforward, like most court proceedings. You're going to have a court hearing date, an initial court hearing. You're going to have to deal with the charges that are filed against you by the government.
Mhm.
So it's not really the same as criminal court. Technically, it's a civil administrative procedure.
Mhm.
However, you will have to deal with those charges. You can admit them or deny them. And if you deny them, the government has a chance to prove them. If you admit them, then you move on. You have to present your application formally if it's not a case where you were referred from the USCIS asylum office. And then once the application has been presented, it kind of varies from court to court, but some judges want to see a little bit more evidence on the front end. Some of them don't care about the evidence at the initial stage, but once they've accepted your application and you're ready, they will assign you a trial date. And that trial date's usually sometime off in the future, and you'll have several months or in some cases several years to prepare your case for trial. You appear for trial on the day that you've been assigned, and it's like any other court proceeding. There's a judge, there's an interpreter if you prefer not to use English because it's not your first language in that hearing. If you've hired an attorney, you'll have an attorney representing you, and then of course there will be an attorney representing the government in the government's interests. And at that point, you present your evidence, you present your testimony, you present your arguments as to why you do or do not qualify for asylum. The government will do the same thing, and then the judge will issue a decision. And if you're not happy with the judge's decision, then at that point you can file an appeal, usually within 30 days of receiving the judge's decision, and you just kind of go from there.
Right. Thank you. Another question we have is the stakes in immigration courts are incredibly high. These cases can literally determine whether a person stays or gets deported. What kind of evidence or preparation makes the biggest difference in building a strong defensive asylum claim?
That's an absolutely excellent question. And the way I see it as an attorney who litigates these claims is you kind of have two audiences. One audience is going to be the immigration court, so the immigration judge, and the other audience is actually going to be the ICE trial attorney, kind of the person serving the role of a prosecutor in immigration court. And so you're really speaking to both of them, and you're really trying to get them both. You're trying to limit the possibilities of them finding that you're not eligible for asylum. So the first and most important piece of evidence, and people always forget this, but it is truly evidence, is our own words. So somebody's
Mhm.
testimony, somebody's ability to tell their own story is absolutely evidence. And in fact, the Immigration and Nationality Act allows immigration judges to approve asylum claims based on credible testimony only.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean it's a good idea to only go in with testimony, but when you
Mhm.
talk about the most impactful evidence, I think it starts with testimony. And so, what you really want to make sure is that you get well versed and practiced in telling your story. And I don't mean exaggerating the details or lying or becoming too robotic, but you want to get experience speaking about your case and about the experiences that you had that drove you to come to the United States. And so in our office, we usually do several rounds of practice with our clients. But we also, pass those clients around to different individuals in the office and give them the chance to tell their story.
Mhm.
So when you're meeting with me or one of the other attorneys in the office, we're going to have you tell us the story.
Mhm.
But you're also going to meet with my paralegal or my legal assistant at some point in time and tell them the story. And then if we've decided to assign more than one attorney to your case, you're going to tell that other attorney the story, just so
Mhm.
you get that opportunity to tell it to several different people and get questions and critiques in terms of how the story is told. Another thing that we frequently do is we usually advise virtually all of our asylum applicants to go and get a psychological evaluation. Not because we think our clients are crazy or because they are not capable of seeing reality, but just because one, it helps them deal with some of the trauma that they actually almost certainly went through if they've arrived at this point, and two, a psychologist or another type of mental health professional like a therapist is very likely going to help you learn how to communicate the trauma that you've been through not just to yourself, but to other people.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of where we start, right? That testimony. I know that was a long-winded explanation, but testimony is so important. And it's so important because if the judge doesn't believe you, if the judge finds that your testimony is not credible,
Mhm.
you're going to lose your application. Even if you have other forms of evidence, you are very likely to see your asylum application denied if you
Mhm.
do not come across as credible. So for me, as a practicing immigration attorney, whether you're in front of the immigration court or even in front of the USCIS asylum office, you've got to be able to tell that story and tell it in a believable way. Now, after that, there's still several other categories of evidence. I mean, in our office, the way we communicate it, and it may be a little different from how other attorneys communicate it, but we really look at, three additional qualities of, three additional types of evidence that we like to present in most of our cases. The first would be what we call direct evidence, and that's going to be the evidence that most people think about when they think about evidence, right? So
Mhm.
if you were harmed in your country of origin, or if you were arrested, or if you filed police reports, or if you received treatment from a hospital, we would want proof of that. So pictures of your injuries, receipts or medical reports from the hospital, copies of the police report if you filed a police report. I've had clients from some countries where they've been cited and called into interviews with law enforcement to investigate
Mhm.
them specifically for their political activities. I want copies of those citations
Mhm.
and copies of those appointment notices so that we can present that. If you have been accused unjustly of a crime in your country, we want that court paperwork. That's what we would refer to kind of as direct evidence, evidence that speaks directly to the experience that you endured in your country of origin. But there's also a lot of indirect evidence that helps a lot. And that's really where an attorney, I think, does a lot of their work. You know, whether you have direct evidence or not is going to kind of come down to you as an individual who's applying for asylum. But a lot of individuals who don't have a lot of experience with it may have a little bit more difficulty finding what we call indirect evidence. And that's going to be things like country condition reports published by credible government agencies. The US Department of State, for example, collects human rights reports. Every year they publish them on every country on earth. The CIA maintains what they call a fact book on every country. Other governments like Spain, the United Kingdom, Canada do the same thing. You can go to universities, you can go to newspapers and other journalist organizations and obtain information and
Mhm.
stories that have been published about the country of origin so that you can show that other people who are similarly situated to you have gone through the same thing
Mhm.
in your country of origin. That evidence is extremely important because it adds to your credibility and it shows that you're not alone, that this wasn't some type of one off thing.
Mhm.
That other people have suffered the same type of thing, and that goes, for things I'm sure we'll get into here in a little bit. That can be extremely important as part of the analysis. And then the final type of evidence that we include in a lot of our cases, but not in every case, is what I call, anyways, and I know other people have different names for it, but I refer to it as expert or professional evidence.
Mhm.
And what that might be is, if you go visit that psychologist that we advise you to visit, for example,
Mhm. Mhm.
it might be a psychological eval
Mhm.
that we include that shows that you've actually been diagnosed with something like post traumatic stress disorder or some other type of anxiety disorder based on the abuse that you suffered. It could be a PhD or an academic who studies the situation in your country of origin, who publishes reports and who is able to take the time to look over your specific case and talk
Mhm.
about how the things that you've gone through fit into the wider experience of people coming from your country of origin. And they can be a real advisor, not just to your legal team, but also to the court in understanding all of the issues that may arise over the course of that claim. We've even used attorneys and accountants, both and doctors,
Mhm.
both in our country and in other countries, to help us provide additional evidence and clarification in asylum cases. And not everyone can afford that professional evidence. It's usually an additional cost. I mean,
Mhm.
no one's going to do that for free. But in a lot of cases, it's extremely important. And I have seen cases where that psychological evaluation or that expert witness have been the difference between winning or losing.
Mhm. Thank you. So let's talk about legal representation. How important is it to have an attorney in defense of asylum proceedings, and what should people look for when seeking legal help? And like, how should they build trust?
Yeah, so I think that's also really important, and I think that when it comes to building trust, every attorney is going to work differently, and so what I say today may not be how other extremely competent attorneys may want to run things, but I'm going to go through that. But before I do, to get to kind of the first question, if you look at the statistics nationally, having an
Mm-hmm.
attorney makes a tremendous difference.
Mm-hmm.
People are several orders of magnitude more likely to win their asylum claim with an attorney
Mm-hmm.
than without an attorney. Now, I have seen people who've won their asylum claim without an attorney. It certainly happens, and sometimes you have cases that are just so strong, and you draw the right immigration judge or the right asylum officer, and you're going to get approved regardless.
Mm-hmm.
However, most cases aren't like that. And I think in working in a time in our history in the United States where we, as a country, have an increasingly hostile attitude towards asylum seekers, having an
Mm-hmm.
attorney is probably more important now than ever.
Mm-hmm.
But that being said, I understand that not everyone can afford one. So attorneys are going to charge money, obviously, if they're a private attorney. But there are several pro bono attorneys who are among some of the best attorneys I've ever seen. I mean, there are whole pro bono organizations, particularly along the border and in areas like Louisiana that have high numbers of detention facilities,
Mm-hmm.
where those attorneys are some of the best there are. Period. Um, Here in the part of the country where I live, we also have a couple of nonprofits that help people,
Mm-hmm.
not just in their asylum claims, but on other immigration matters. So never let cost get in the way. If you're not able to afford a private attorney of your choosing, go and look at some of these nonprofit organizations. Every immigration court in the United States maintains a list of organizations that offer pro bono representation before the immigration court. And that list is given to you at the time you're placed into removal proceedings. And so you can go through that list and see who all is there. Now, the only disadvantage that I'm aware of when it comes to hiring one of those pro bono attorneys or one of those free attorneys is just going to be that they're going to be overwhelmed
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of people, unfortunately, can't afford legal representation. But that being said, most of the private immigration attorneys I know in at least my region of the country, and I've practiced most of my career in the South Central and Midwest portions of the United States, most immigration attorneys do offer, flat fees and flexible payment plan options. You don't necessarily need to walk into an attorney's office, pay $10,000 or $15,000, and then walk out and hope that they're gonna do their job.
Mm-hmm.
It's usually going to be a long-term contract because
Mm-hmm.
asylum proceedings can last for years.
Definitely. Thank you for that. To our amazing audience, thank you for joining us. Whether you're tuning in from Facebook, YouTube, or LinkedIn, we're thrilled to have you here. We are immigrationquestion.com, a two-in-one platform built with lead and case management features to help simplify the immigration process. Though we are not affiliated with AILA, we are trusted by a lot of AILA attorneys who use our platform. You can ask your questions for free in any language and get connected with a licensed attorney for guidance. You may also receive a free confidential initial consultation. Just visit www.immigrationquestion.com and sign up today. And in some exciting news, we've launched our new app built to serve both attorneys and users seamlessly. Now, Attorney Bogart, as an experienced immigration attorney, what do you think about immigrationquestion.com and what it's doing for the immigrant community and even for immigration attorneys like yourself?
I think it provides a lot of help. I think that one for people who are facing an immigration issue, having a site that they can go to learn some of the basics of immigration law in a digestible way, the importance of that really can't be overstated. And it is a trustworthy platform with good information that I think really helps people get started on the right path. As far as attorneys are concerned, it also helps us because immigration law is big. It's complicated. No one has the time to sit down and learn every aspect of it. There's a reason why, for example, I mainly only do, removal defense litigation because I don't have, the brain capacity to think of every single aspect of immigration law. And immigrationquestions.com and similar platforms allow us to go and kind of see at least the headlines of what's going on and can kind of help direct us a little bit better in our research.
Thank you. Thank you, Attorney Bogart. We love hearing that. Before we dive into our live Q&A session, one last question. For those watching today who might be facing removal but aren't sure if asylum is even an option, what should they do? Like, what are their first steps, and what's the smartest move that they could do before the time runs out?
Even if you don't end up hiring an attorney, I would talk to an attorney, particularly an attorney who you can verify has experience representing individuals applying for asylum before the immigration courts specifically.
Mhm.
The second question is you need to figure out, do you have fear of returning home to your country? And the third question would be, what are your long-term goals? When I talk to clients, there are several different motivating factors for why they would apply for asylum. Almost all of them are truthfully afraid of going back home to their country. I have rarely met anybody who's come to talk to me about applying for asylum who's not had a legitimate fear of going back to their country of origin. But if you go and talk to an attorney first, they're going to kind of help walk you through your case. Now, with me, it's usually, a couple of appointments. I don't usually have my clients tell me everything they went through in the first consultation. We just get a chance to get to know each other. I walk them through the process of what applying for asylum would be like at the immigration court level. And then we usually have a follow-up consultation where we talk a little bit more in detail about why they're afraid of going home. And it's not that those details of why they're afraid of going home aren't important. They're obviously fundamental. But I've learned over the years that it takes time to win people's trust and to get them to really open up, even more so when they actually have been through trauma and when they really have been victimized by somebody in the past. But if you're afraid of talking to an attorney, just go do it anyways. Because if you don't have someone to orient you as to whether your case on its face appears approvable or not, you may end up doing something that down the road you regret. There's also several weird requirements of asylum that people don't always talk about. So, for example, you really need to do your best to apply for asylum within 1 year of arriving to the United States. That doesn't mean it's impossible to do so if it's been more than 1 year. There are some exceptions, but that is a rule. You have to apply for asylum within 1 year of coming to the United States. And if you wait past a year, your experience may be very different from people who did not wait past 1 year. And then, like I said, you need to evaluate your long-term goals as well. I have clients who very honestly tell me, yes, I am afraid of going home, but I understand that my case may not be the strongest of all time, or I don't have all the evidence. But really, my goal is, because I'm afraid of going home, I would like to buy myself time in this country before I have to go back, so that I can either find a third country that I can go to, or that hopefully the situation in my home country calms down. And that's a legitimate thing, because what you have to remember about asylum is, unless it's a frivolous asylum claim, which means that it's an asylum claim based on lies, based on fraud, you have a right to apply for asylum. It may be a weak claim. You may not have all the evidence in the world. You may be afraid of something that doesn't quite reach the high legal standard that the immigration laws require. But that doesn't mean that you can't win certain benefits, such as more time, by applying for asylum. And every attorney is going to have their own viewpoint on that. If a client comes to me and they're afraid of going home, I'm generally going to hear them out, and we're going to have a conversation about how we can move forward. I know other attorneys, though, who, if it's not a 100% slam dunk case, they're not interested. And I think that with the changing with the changing, experience that we're going through right now in the United States, most attorneys are probably starting to get a little bit more careful about which claims they present to a court, and which claims they don't present to a court. And I know in our office, we're certainly having that conversation and have been most of the year. But it's never going to hurt just going and talking to someone.
Thank you for that. If you're just joining us, we've been having a very insightful session with Attorney Bogart to the topic Defense of Asylum for Immigration Courts. We're just getting to our live Q&A session, and this is your chance to ask Attorney Bogart your own questions directly. Just type them in the chat or call us live at 516-703-3483. All right, our first question is, when I try to talk about what happened, I forget everything. Will the judge think I'm lying because of my trauma, or what kind of help can I get now?
Yeah. There are some immigration judges who are jerks. I mean, just to put it bluntly, and who may not be overly trauma informed. And so I think the best thing that you can do is kind of going back to earlier in the conversation where we talk about, if you have realistic, verifiable issues with recall and with trauma, go see a psychologist, go see it, or both a psychologist and a psychiatrist, get a diagnosis, get some treatment. That may help you when it comes to communicating the story. But even if it doesn't, at that point, at least we have something verifiable we can point to and tell the judge, hey, our client has been verified by mental health professionals to have gone through trauma, and that affects him or her in this verifiable way. It's not a guarantee of anything because, again, judges are human beings just like everybody else. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to have their own prejudices, their own viewpoints. And then, of course, you have essentially a prosecutor representing ICE present in the courtroom as well, who's going to be pushing back on our story. But it is going to be verifiable evidence that we can point to. So that is an excellent question. It is way more common than you think. And just one of many reasons we recommend a psychological evaluation in every single asylum case that we do.
Thank you. Next question is, I didn't know I had to apply for asylum within 1 year. I filed after 18 months. Will they deport me just because I was late?
No, they will not. As things stand today, I want to make that absolutely clear. Obviously, every day when it comes to immigration law, I feel like we wake up to more bad news. So who knows what's going to happen tomorrow or 10 months from now. But as of today, no. So different judges handle it differently. But as a threshold matter, there are 2 additional benefits that you typically apply for at the same time as you're applying for asylum. So if you fill out your asylum application correctly, you are generally speaking applying for asylum, for withholding of removal, and for relief under the Convention Against Torture. And so even if you filed over a year after arriving to the United States because you didn't know or for some other reason, and the judge finds that it's not excusable, the judge can still entertain your withholding of removal and your Convention Against Torture applications. Mm-hmm. On top of that, even if it's clearly obvious on its face that you're filing late, most judges are going to want to have a trial. And in that trial, they're going to talk about the 1-year issue. And so if there is an excuse for having missed the 1-year filing deadline, you can talk about it in that trial and present arguments and try and convince the judge that you having missed that deadline was justifiable. So again, in all of the cases I've handled, and we've handled cases where the 1-year filing deadline was not met. It happens a lot. Mm-hmm. To be honest with you, most of the time it's not even the client's fault. Mm-hmm. It's ICE's fault because they come in, they get their notice to appear in immigration court, and then ICE doesn't file that notice to appear for 2 or 3 years. And our client, if they're not represented prior to the 1-year filing deadline, they don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. So I don't really blame my clients in most of those situations. But again, in my cases that I've handled, immigration judges have never just ordered someone deported or refused to grant them a trial just because they missed the 1-year filing deadline.
Thank you. Our next question is, I don't understand legal words and I get nervous in court. Can someone help explain my rights in a simple way?
Yes, they can. And if you don't understand legal words, that's okay. Even a lot of us who pretend like we do don't always understand. Right? It's it's complicated. So yes, if your attorney is doing a good job when they speak with you one on one, they're going to try and make sure that they communicate it to you in a way that you understand. I understand that as an attorney, I can frequently start speaking in legalese to people. It's common. It's just one of the curses of being an attorney and associating primarily with attorneys when I'm at work. But I always go over things with my clients two, three, four, however many times I need to make sure that they understand what the situation is. And all of the attorneys who work with me do the same thing. And to be honest with you, most of my colleagues that I've had the privilege of working with in cases also do the same thing. Some attorneys are better at it than others, but if you don't understand something, just keep asking them to explain it to you until you do. And if they can't explain it to you, have them point you to resources. There's all kinds of resources online from immigrationquestions.com, from the American Immigration Lawyers Association, from a million different platforms and organizations that will break things down in easy to understand language.
Thank you. Next question is, I came with my child, but now we're being processed separately. How can I make sure we stay together during our asylum case?
That is shockingly common. Um, I've even I've even had cases where people are processing with different immigration courts for some reason, and cases where some people have their cases started with the immigration court and other people don't. And other
Mhm.
members of the same family don't have their cases started with the immigration court. So it really depends. If you're both pending in front of the same immigration court, filing a motion to consolidate or a motion to combine your cases into one matter is the fairly simple and easy way to get that done. Most judges are going to approve that without any issues. I've run into a couple in different parts of the country who, for whatever reason, give us a little bit of a hard time. But most judges want to unify the cases for all family members because it's way easier for them
Mhm.
to handle a unified case as opposed to handling three or four or five uh, different
Mhm.
cases that are really all the same case. Now, if you have a situation where one person is processing in front of the asylum office and another member of the family is in front of the immigration court, that's going to be a lot more difficult.
Mhm.
And there's not a whole lot you can do to make sure that your cases stay together. You can ask the court and you can say, hey, my child or my spouse, their case is with the asylum office and I'm here with the immigration court. Could you dismiss my process so that I could be consolidated with my family member at the asylum office? But I would expect ICE to oppose that, and some immigration judges probably would not even entertain that. But there are some who probably would.
Mhm.
It's really just going to depend on the circumstances.
Thank you. Next question is, I escaped religious persecution from my family and community, but my asylum hearing keeps getting delayed. How long will I have to wait, and can I work legally while I wait?
That's another excellent question. Yes, so it's very common. It's extremely common for cases to keep getting delayed. A lot of it started during the pandemic era, and it's continued since then. There are far too few immigration judges for the number of cases that are processing in front of the immigration court, and even fewer immigration court staff to support those immigration judges. It's just common. I had a trial just yesterday that was pushed back. That we were just about to submit all the evidence for. It's just something that's part of the immigration court experience. So it's impossible to say exactly how long you're going to have to wait. A lot of it depends on the court you're practicing in front of, the judge you're practicing in front of. I know right now, at least in my region of the country, we've had immigration judges who've left the bench, who've left the court. Um, as part of this transition to a new administration, which is only going to make backlogs worse. Now, as far as whether you can work legally or not, that's going to depend on the circumstances. For individuals who have applied for asylum within 1 year of arriving to the United States, they should have the right to apply for a work permit. The court assigns what we call an asylum clock to the case. And once that clock gets to 180 days, you are eligible to apply for a work permit. So what you'll want to do is you'll want to go online or you'll want to call the immigration court and check that clock so that you can figure out if you have gotten to that 180 days or not. It's a very complicated matter because sometimes judges will stop the clock and sometimes it doesn't make a lot of sense why they do, which may also necessitate communication or formal action with the immigration court to make sure that it gets taken care of. But if you have a clock and it's running and it passes 180 days, then yes, you can absolutely apply for a work permit.
Thank you. And then our last question is, my partner abused me for years and I ran with my son, but someone told me domestic violence doesn't count for asylum. Is this true?
It's not true. Domestic violence can absolutely qualify somebody for asylum, but it is going to depend on the circumstances, just like everything else. First and foremost, I've run into some immigration judges who are just more skeptical of domestic violence claims than others, and it can be a little hard. Sometimes the evidence can be a little bit difficult to obtain as well. But depending on which region of the United States you live in, several United States Circuit Courts of Appeal have clearly recognized domestic violence as a ground for asylum. And the Board of Immigration Appeals, which is the first appellate body we take cases to if we get a decision we don't like from the immigration court, has also recognized the possibility of domestic violence claims. Yes, you can apply for asylum for being the victim of domestic violence. And depending on the circumstances, you may very well be approved. So I would definitely talk to an attorney, go over the details of the case, figure out what evidence you can reasonably access, and then move forward with that.
Thank you. That was all of our questions. That was an incredible session. Thank you so much for joining us, and a special thank you to our special guest, Attorney Bogart, for your practical and strategic insights. We hope this webinar helped answer your questions on defensive asylum. Remember, at immigrationquestion.com, you can ask your immigration questions for free and get connected with a licensed attorney in good standing who can help you and better understand your options. You may also qualify for a free initial confidential consultation. Visit our site to learn more. Don't forget, you can rewatch this session or listen to previous episodes on Spotify. Just search for Borderless Talk by immigrationquestion.com. Join us again on Wednesday for another enlightening edition regarding another burning immigration topic. Trust us, you won't want to miss it. Once again, thank you, Attorney Bogart, for your time, and we look forward to having you back again.